I'm Beck and welcome to my April reading wrap up. I read 5 books and I also DNF'd or did not finish 1 book during April, so let's get into discussing everything that I have read. Firstly, I finished Well Met by Jen DeLuca, which is a romance that I've been eyeing off for a while, and I finished Well Met and I gave it 3 stars, and this one follows Emily and Simon. So Emily has just moved to this small town to help her older sister recover from a car accident injury, and while she's in this town, she's also helping care for her older sister's daughter, like her high school daughter, and her daughter wants to sign up to the Renaissance fair that happens every year in this town, but she can't sign up unless she's got a guardian to sign up with her. And so Emily goes, okay, well, I guess I'm signing up to this Renaissance fair. And while she's signing up, she encounters Simon, who is one of the teachers. He's the key person responsible for the fact that it keeps going every year, and he's a very big stickler for detail. So when she's signing up, she doesn't really fill in her sign-up form right, and he's there critiquing or criticizing her and making sure that she does the form correctly. So she's like, oh, well, this guy's a turd because he's such a stickler for detail and he's being so mean to me. I'm only trying to sign up to support my niece. So yeah, they start off on a almost enemies front, and then as the Renaissance fair kicks off, he during the fair becomes a pirate, and he's almost got this different personality. It's like when he's dressed up as a pirate, he becomes that swashbuckling and easygoing person, whereas in his, real character, or real person I should say, he is really contained and very controlled. So he really lets loose as a pirate, and while he's a pirate and while Emily is a bar wench, they form this on and off romance, and they don't really know how to pass it because they're like, is this just us being in character or is this real? And I liked the element of the Renaissance fair. The Ren Fair really elevated the setting, and I love how it encouraged discussion and interaction of the characters. I loved how it almost created like friends and found family that Emily hadn't had before, and so she was really finding her feet in this place. What I didn't like about this was the constant to and fro of the 2 love interests. So it felt like a lot of things could be solved if they'd just ask a question or have a conversation, and that made the plot draw out a lot longer than I thought it would. And there were some questions that once these characters knew each other a bit more, they could have easily asked each other. And if you know anything about me, you know that I dislike miscommunication as a trope. And I feel like there was miscommunication in these characters. At a certain point, conversations did happen. So it's not like it went on forever, but it went on to kind of fuel the 3rd act, which is personally just a frustrating thing for me. Why build up to all of this rhythm if you could just have a conversation and get bad things out of the way sooner? So I did like the book. I enjoyed the setting and I enjoyed Emily's narration style, but I just did not like tension points with the characters. And I felt like because there was a key cornerstone of grief for Simon that was linked to this Ren Fair, people who knew him probably should have stepped in sooner. Like, why did it go on this long? And why did it cause this fracturing of himself? It was just a little bit hard to suspend my disbelief all of the time, which is why I gave it 3 stars. I don't think I'm going to continue with Jen DeLuca, at least not with this series anyway. It was enjoyable enough, but it was just a romance book that I read and discarded. I'm really glad I borrowed the audiobook from Libby so that I didn't have to pay any money for it. It was just an enjoyable time, and it was a pocket of time, and now I'm moving on. Then I read the very popular cozy fantasy book called Sword Heart, and people have said this is cozy fantasy. Personally, I think it's more romantasy, and this follows Hala, who is in her mid-30s, and she has just inherited a whole bunch of money and estate, and her family are trying to take that away from her. They lock her in this room and they want to marry her off to one of her cousins so that the wealth then goes to that cousin, and then they're going to probably, kill her off once they've got the wealth. So she's like, okay, well, if I'm going to die anyway, I may as well take my own life. I don't want to, but I guess I will. And while she is trying to very badly fall on a sword that was an ornamental sword that was on the wall, she realizes once she tries to draw that sword that Sarkis comes out of it, and he is a spirit linked to the sword, and he's like, please don't do that. Whoever draws me, I'm obliged to protect them. That is my whole responsibility. So I have to stop you from dying. And so it starts in a very comedic state, and that comedic state is carried all through the book. And I like that tone, and these characters formed a bond and a trust for each other. And then eventually this bond became them escaping and going on this kind of quest and bringing more characters into it. So I did like that element of the story, but I felt a bit let down by the world building because I was personally expecting more about the sword lore and about Sarkis's background. But if I'd researched this before I'd started reading it, BookTube made me think that this was a standalone, and it very much isn't. I think it's like a companion book rather than a standalone, and it's linked to a wider series. And I think if I'd read that wider series before reading this, I would understand more about Sarkis's past and about the events that led him to being in this sword. And those are kind of the questions I wanted answered in this book, and I wanted things resolved. So that didn't really happen in terms of like the fantasy element, but the romance element was really lovely. And I really did like the random found family that was formed across this book. It was really sweet and loving. And Hella herself was just very chatty and full of kindness. And she somehow managed to weaponize the stupidity of being a woman, because she's like, no one expects me to be smart, even though I am. And so when I run into people on the road and they accuse me of doing different things, like these priests in this world who are up to no good, she just spins this whole tale, and because she's going and going and going, they kind of have to buy into it. And then she manages to get away, and Sarkis is like, what just happened? This was resolved without any physical conflict. How did you do that? So she had her own way of navigating her way in the world, and I really liked seeing that crop up because it often led to a lot of comedic moments. So again, I liked the tone of this book. The plot was so-so for me, and the romance was the key. So I'd give this one as well a 3 stars. And while I liked it enough to obviously read and finish it, I don't think I'm going to go and read the rest of the series. Like, this was enough for me. I'm good now. Then I picked up a new release, which is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, and I listened to this audiobook as well. And this one follows Lucia, and she is a scullery maid in this world, and it's a historical fantasy, so it's almost got Spanish or Italian vibes to it, set in the 1800s or something. And Lucia has this magic, but she's also a Jew, and so if she's caught saying different language to what is accepted, then she'll be touted as someone who communes with demons, and she'll be executed as a result. So she's got to be really careful about when she spins this magic and how she disguises her language. Usually I would go, oh, that's a cool like fantasy world building thing, but something about historical fantasy just makes me not interested at all in that whole element of real life being part of the fantasy story. I don't know what it is, my brain just doesn't compute, but that kind of formed a religious basis for the whole book, and personally I just was not interested in that aspect. But I did like the fact that Lucia's magic meant that she was brought before the king, and there was this whole magical trial of other characters in this book, and there was a key respondent for the king, and he would have to support the monarchy but also didn't want to be there, and you found out that he is the familiar, like he is almost immortal because of a curse, and how this curse wove into the story was really intriguing. So it was a very vivid and languid writing style. I really love how Leigh Bardugo manages to immerse you in the story. Like I said, it really shouldn't have been my vibe or my thing, but because it was Leigh Bardugo's writing style, she managed to pull me in, which I was quite impressed with. But the realism element of historical fantasy is where it alienates me, which seems completely ridiculous because I like urban fantasy, and that's fantasy in a urban or city setting. I don't know why my brain just couldn't compute this book, but I gave it a 3 stars out of 5. So it was an enjoyable book and I would recommend it. I think if you like historical fantasy, and also if you like Leigh Bardugo's writing, you're probably going to enjoy this book. Personally though, I just don't know what my brain was running into in terms of a brick wall, but it was fine and I enjoyed it and I would recommend it, but it's not one that I would actively go back to. I think I prefer her writing in the Ninth House series much more because it's got that more fantasy urban focus with a dark academia aspect thrown in as well. So yeah, that's much more my wheelhouse, whereas this one wasn't, and that's all I really have to say about it. Now, I talked about The Familiar in my most recent reading vlog, so I'll link it in the cards and in the description for you so you can go and check out my different steps of reading these books. But the next one that I wanted to talk about is a book that I did not end up finishing because it is Crucible of Chaos, and I got 64 pages into this book and I could not stand the protagonist. And this is a continuation of the Greatcoats Quartet, which I personally love. It's one of my favorite fantasy series ever. So I thought with this one, I'm like, I'm gonna love this, surely. It did capture the writing style and tone that I've grown to love and expect from Sebastian de Castell, but the problem that was alienating me was Estevar, the main character. So this opens with Estevar already having a grievous sword wound for fighting a duel previously off page that we weren't privy to for reasons that were really dumb. And so because he's decided to go for his pride and fight this duel, he got a stupid injury and now it's taking its toll. And he's just been sent to this island because he is a magistrate. So he's going to this island on a quest from the first cantor of the Greatcoats in order to solve what is going on here. And it's more like a magical murder mystery with religion in this world that has been taken over by magic and caused an isolation of this town and and obviously not good things have happened to it. It used to be thriving and it's not anymore. So he's going there because he's interested in magic, whereas in the first series, Falkio hated magic. So I was like, oh, this will be a good spin on it too. But honestly, Estevar was so annoying to me that it was a struggle not to poke my own eyes out while I was reading the beginning of this book. He would just go on ad nauseum about every single little thing, even when he was literally drowning. Him and his horse were literally drowning in the ocean, and he could not figure out a way to save both of them. I mean, obviously him and his horse made it to shore eventually because it's the start of the book and those are the key characters. But he was literally dying and he was monologuing. And I'm like, this is just ridiculous and it's driving me nuts. Like, even Falkio wouldn't have done that. He would have actually like pulled his finger out and done something rather than just being chatty. Like, it was so annoying. So I could not stand Estevar, and I'm very glad that I looked into how this related to his next series, which is Court of Shadows, and that starts out with Play of Shadows, which is book 1, which I haven't started yet, but I plan to shortly. And if I don't like it, I guess I surrender and I just stop reading Sebastian de Castell, because this is going to be the like 3rd or 4th in a long line of busts for me after the Greatcoats books. Anyway, that aside, this is a prequel that is a standalone before Play of Shadows. So I don't necessarily need to read this in order to read Play of Shadows. Thank goodness, because this is on its way out. I'm not continuing it. I'm not picking it up again. It drives me nuts and I don't want to look at it anymore. Then I received a pre-order of a most anticipated release. I have been waiting for this book for over a year, and that is Court of Wanderers by Rincha Pecco, and I gave this a 3 stars as well. It's like my reading has just tanked and I cannot find anything that I actively really enjoy, which is so frustrating and disappointing. But this one follows directly on from the events of Silver Under Nightfall, so I won't say exactly what's going on, but ultimately this duology follows Remy, who is a vampire hunter, and it also follows 2 vampire court nobles, which are Xiaodan Song and Zidane Malik, and they are coming to the city of Illyria where Remy lives in order to broker a deal for peace between vampires and humans so they can live together in harmony. And while Remy is on board with this idea, it's not a popular idea in the city of Illyria, and he also, while he's on the road doing a job, encounters vampires with a different kind of blood that he thinks is weird, and this is actually the rot virus, and this virus infects humans and turns them into mutant vampire monsters that are really impossible to kill. And Xiaodan and Zidane have encountered this before, and they're trying to get to the bottom of what is going on. So as an envoy for Illyria, Remy is sent along with the 2 nobles to go to Zidane's lab and research this more and then figure out where this came from. And from that point on, they form a male-male, female polyamorous romance, and this is a romantasy series. And I loved the romantasy and the fantasy in the first book because I feel like both elements were balanced quite well. Whereas in this book, the romance was great. I really loved the kindness that was starting to unfurl in this book and more of the trust that was evident in this trio. But unfortunately for me, the fantasy element really just fell flat. This book felt so rushed. At the beginning, it was so jarring because it felt like it was throwing all these names and places and facts at me when I'd only recently just read the previous book. And I don't know if I'd had a gap if it would have been helpful, honestly, because the difference between the ending of Silver Under Nightfall and starting this book, it felt like we left a lot of almost grief and trauma after this particular battle, and there were ramifications there. And then in this book, it was like a day or 2 later, and suddenly it was like sunshine and rainbows. And the jarring aspect of that emotion was very whiplashy, and it was a struggle for me to get back into it. I also was panicking a little bit because I'm like, Silver Under Nightfall is one of my favorite books ever. Does that mean I'm going to hate this book? And I didn't hate it. Thank God. I did only enjoy it though, and it does not hold a candle to the first book in my mind. I did a separate review for it, but that will be out a couple of weeks after my wrap up, so it'll also be spoiler free, so I go into more of my thoughts there. But honestly, this was just a bit disappointing and I wanted it to be so much more. And I think even though I was trying to recognize what my expectations would be for this book, it still fell short, which is so disappointing. The plot was rushed, the pace was all over the place. A plot started to fall out at 200 pages and I was like, oh, okay, this is what the point is. Yeah, I'm just so frustrated. This book could have been so much better. If you split it into 2 books, it would have had the great amount of detail that you required of it, and it would have been able to spend the right time in the right places. I did enjoy it enough to say, yeah, read the duology. I think it's worth reading. I'm glad I read it and I enjoyed most of it, but there were just some key things that dragged it down for me. So that's why I'm going with the 3-star rating. I wanted to love it, and that's what is disappointing to me the most. I have 2 more books to talk about. So the second last book is The Final Strife, and this one follows follows our main character, Scylla, and she is the product of what is called the Sandstorm. So in the past, there have been massive blood feuds, and this sandstorm is a rebellion against all of the wardens of current time. So these wardens have red blood, and the dusters, which are the lower class, have blue blood, and then the class below the dusters have translucent blood, and they're called the ghostings, and they are used as the unseen slaves, and they have their hands cut off and their tongues cut out so they can't protest. So it's a world with very dark undertones to it, and Scylla is a ember blood, so a red blood, but she's disguised as a duster because after this sandstorm tried to enact some kind of rebellion, they were found out and then a lot of them were killed. But Scylla survived that massacre, and ever since, it's been 6 years, and she's been trying to survive in this city with her adopted mother. And this whole time she's been taking this drug called the Jora seed, and this Jora seed has fueled her adrenaline and helped her in this fighting ring to make money in the city, but it's killing her very, very quickly because she's taking too many of them. And she's taking them also to cope with the trauma that she's witnessed for the sandstorm being killed and massacred. So she's like, do I give up on their dream? And while she is trying to survive, not doing a very good job at it, and at the last wit's end of her taking these Jora seeds, she's like, I'm gonna take a last stand. She's drunk and she's high, and she climbs into the window of Anor, and Anor is the daughter to the Warden of Strength, and the Warden of Strength is Scylla's mother. But because she was stolen at birth, the warden doesn't know about Scylla. She knows that her daughter Anor has blue blood because they were swapped at birth, and that's all that she knows, and she's tried to keep that a secret. So Scylla breaks into Anor's room, doesn't really know why she's doing it because obviously she is very inebriated, and Anor manages to take her hostage by knocking her out with different blood spells and keeps her in this cupboard and treats her for her addiction. And while she's being treated for her addiction, Anor is like, if you train me to fight in our Estebar, which is like a trial to determine the next round of wardens, then I will teach you blood work so you can do magic. So let's do a trade-off. And they eventually decide to do this trade-off. They work together. Scylla is very resistant to it at first because she feels like a prisoner, and she's the handmaiden for Anor. But obviously as the book continues, they form this lovely bond, and early on one of Scylla's old childhood friends, John, appears, and he actually isn't dead based on the massacre of the sandstorm that she witnessed all these years ago. He has been in the city and being trained up to join the Estevar himself, because that was the sandstorm's whole initial purpose, to join the Estevar, to win, to take over, and to overthrow the current ruling. And so he's stuck to this plan the whole time. The sandstorm still exists, but it's very different to what it was. Scylla wants to get back in. She's being barred from entry and has to do a few things to prove her loyalty to the sandstorm, and so she starts to rekindle this relationship that she had with John, but it's tricky because it was laced with childhood memory and trauma as well. When I was reading this, I noticed that Scylla looked at John and noticed how attractive he was, and then she also noticed different things about Anor's physical qualities, and I was like, I don't think she's straight, and it's confirmed that she is not straight. I really like the surprise romance in this book, and I liked obviously the building of relationships. I enjoyed the different betrayals and the different development of the world building. I liked how the blood working really tied into their hierarchy and their knowledge base. It was only a 3 stars for me. With all of this building, it felt like it should be worth a higher rating, but I could pick it up and put it down as I wanted to, and I wasn't particularly attached to finishing it or not. Obviously I did finish it because it was enjoyable enough to finish, but if I didn't finish it, I don't think I would be cut up about it. So yeah, another 3 stars. This month has just been full of 3-star ratings, which is fine, but just disappointing that they're not 5 stars, if you know what I mean. And then speaking of 3-star ratings, I've got Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett, which I only just recently finished this morning. And this is a story about Sanshia. She is an escaped slave, and she's got this plate in her head that lets her hear scrivings, and scrivings really focus on the magic system in this book. In the city of Tavan, you either have everything or you have nothing, and there is a huge divide, and this divide is very much based on the magic and technology of the scrivings. So the scrivings can make different objects have a particular purpose. A prime example of this would be the way that a wheel spins on a carriage. So they've almost got motorized vehicles because of these scriving marks, but there's a whole lot of lore that goes into supporting these scrivings, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. The book opens with Sanshia doing a heist, and she's got to break into this complex and steal a magical object, and she doesn't realize the significance of it until after she's stolen it, and she was instructed not to open the box, but of course she opens the box, and inside there is a key called Clef, and when she touches the key, he speaks in her mind. I don't usually like the whole magical imbued item has a personality trope, but in this book it was actually done very well, to the point that I really enjoyed it. I think if it wasn't done as well, I probably wouldn't have finished this book, because their relationship and how they functioned in the world to survive and adapt is what made things interesting to me. After she steals this item though, she gets a lot of different people on her tail for varying reasons, and one of those people is Gregor Dandolo, and he is one of the members of the key houses in this society. So there are 4 houses that have massive power, and he's part of those houses. He is an ex-soldier, and he's now wanting to establish a police force to get justice in this city or this world where there is not a lot of order and it's not very balanced in the terms of power, and he wants to right those scales a little bit. So he's tracking down Sanchia to reinstate some order and repent her for her theft. And so they run into each other, they form a form of survival alliance because other people are on their tail as well, and then everything just spirals. And it took a lot of the book for things to happen. There was a lot of back and forth description about the world building elements, and while that does interest me, it just got a little bit long in the tooth, and I wanted more things to actually happen. There were a lot of key pivotal scenes that I could visualize, which was epic. A lot happened more so towards the end, and that is what kind of started to amp up the pacing to me. The rest of the book was slow to get to, and it took me about a month or so to read this book. Usually I would finish something like this a lot sooner than that. So yeah, because it took me so long, because the pace was slow, and because I felt a bit bogged down by the world building sometimes instead of the characters actually doing things, yeah, I'd give it a 3 stars. And I was expecting, after loving City of Stairs, to give it a higher rating. City of Stairs I gave 5 stars, and I looked at when they were published. This was from 2018 and City of Stairs was from 2014, and I thought it would be the other way around, because personally I thought that the waiting period of you getting settled in the world for City of Stairs, it happened within 100 pages, or just roughly at 100 pages, whereas this one, it took like 300 pages to get mostly situated and into even more heists and developments that were occurring. So this was much more of a slow burn, and it felt like a big epic fantasy scope because it had that breadth of the world building, whereas City of Stairs was a more contained story in a big scope world. So they were very different beasts, and I very much enjoyed City of Stairs a lot more than this one, but I enjoyed what I did read of it. I don't know at this stage if I'm going to continue. At the moment, I think I'm just a little bit fatigued, so I think I'm going to give it a rest for now. But therein ends my April wrap up. All of the books I read, one of the books I put down, is a bit of a better value than I had in March, where I did not finish like 5 books. I hope in May I find more 4-star reads. More 4 and 5 stars, please, because I just keep getting okay books and I want amazing ones. I want to be obsessed with something. It's so annoying not to have that happen. Anyway, let me know what you are reading down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.